I'm not familiar with what the feds may be up to. We have a call tomorrow morning with, we have a weekly every Tuesday with the White House task force on COVID. If they are planning to make an announcement, I'm sure we'll learn something about it then. We do plan, said last week, that we're going to make some additional announcements here in Massachusetts this week.
Governor, with the
Pardon me?
Can you give us a little bit more about what the announcement will be?
Stay tuned
Can you tell us when you'll expect to make that announcement?
this week.
When this week?
This week.
with the red light